skilled practitioners of mindfulness and meditation, I would imagine, of the kind that would lead to ego death, or I'm not quite sure what that means, would employ exactly the same kind of internally mediated, and sometimes, if you're very skilled, volitionally called forth mechanisms that are actually targeted by psychedelics, that require you now to do all your belief updating and evidence assimilation and sense making at the much more the input level of the black box, not at the, if you like, the highest level, which you could think of as an output in terms of selecting the plans of what am I going to do next and what kind of person am I, narratives that we give ourselves that contextualize the way that we behave and the other things that we do. So, I think there's mechanistically a really interesting connection between the notion of you ruminating, going in circles around your head, exploring ever darker and darker corners of your mind and different hypotheses for which there's very little evidence available, simply because you're not attending to the sensorium. You're not talking to anybody. You're not, for example, you're not focusing on your breathing. And indeed, you try and supplement that with an elastic band just to get yourself back to the sensorium.
That's interesting.
So I think that one would guess you probably are skilled in meditation, but I think the objective of becoming a skilled practitioner of mindfulness or meditation is simply to get some volitional control over that sort of attention that is paid to these deeper machinations versus attention that is paid to the sensorium that underwrites the psychedelic aspect, the allure of just sensory patterns and the sensations and textures that you get, when taking psychedelics. So, getting control of the balance. So it's not the fact you're attending to your breathing, which is important. It's the fact that you can volitionally redirect your attention away from selfhood, getting some control of it. So, but you seem to have got control by this acceptance, and it strikes me that in the absence of feelings of an emotional sort that were articulated in your description in terms of, I'm an awful person, I'm not fit for purpose, I'm not well prepared, I'm not able to man up and own this ego death. All of these sort of personal but quite emotional constructs, affective, valenced aspects. There are also hypotheses. There are also explanations. So the idea is that anything that you can talk about has to be part of an explanation for particular ways of being. That I can be a worthless person, or in this instance, I am a worthless person. No, I'm not a worthless person. And I am in a state of anxiety. I'm not in a state of anxiety. We have to recognize when we are anxious. Anxious is just a state of being, which is necessarily called for in certain situations that rebalance this attentional precision weighting in computational psychiatry to make your belief updating fit for purpose in this particular context. What I'm trying to get to is why acceptance might have worked, because I imagine that if you were suddenly found yourself ruminating and locked into those ruminations, then very much akin to someone on a bad trip who thinks, I am going to be locked in this forever. This is going to be my uncertain state of being for eternity, because there is no reality to
That's how it feels, or how it felt, yeah.
That feeling, well, if that is true, I must be feeling anxious. You are then going to look for evidence that you're feeling anxious, and because you are anxious, you will experience certain cardiac acceleration, certain interoceptive flight or fright-like responses that will supply evidence that you are anxious. And then that becomes evidence, yes, I am right. I am now in a state of nihilism. I do not exist. And I should be anxious about that. And yes, I am anxious. So you get into a vicious circle. So this is the sort of good old-fashioned cognitive behavioral explanation for things like panic attacks, that you quite reasonably, in an entirely base-optimal way, make sense of interoceptive bodily gut feelings, literally. You make sense of them with the hypothesis, I must be in an anxious state of being. And that conclusion, that hypothesis, then generates autonomic actions that are realized reflexively in the way we were talking about when we're looking at the Parkinson's idea. And that will be reflected in terms of cardiac acceleration, neuroendocrine releases into your body, and your body will change, and your body will supply signals, interoceptive evidence. Yes, I am anxious. So it's, again, a self-fulfilling prophecy in exactly the same way that the idea motor theory means that raising my hand is just a realization of my beliefs, but I can literally raise my levels of anxiety in exactly the same way, but invisibly from the outside, but not when I can sense my own body. So if you got yourself caught up into this joint hypothesis, I am in a nihilistic existential state, and I should be really worried about this and anxious about this, then it is quite understandable that you are going to use signals of anxiety and angst generated by your body as evidence that, yes, I am now divorced from reality. I'm an unperson. I am, in a dark and nihilistic place, and there could be no other place. There could be no reality. That's a hypothesis. If you can just wait for the evidence that that hypothesis is incorrect, simply by letting your body calm down so there is no further evidence of any anxiety, then you can find secure, even from your own body, even without talking to somebody, you can secure evidence. The hypothesis that I am in a state of internal nihilism and anxiety is a silly hypothesis, because the evidence refutes it. I can now feel my, not possibly personally, but you will synthesize all your interoceptive feelings in a way that provides evidence against the fact that now I am in a deeply nihilistic, anxious state. I think that just is the motivation for the acceptance. It's just pushing through to get to a state of mind and a state of body, literally, realizing and making sense of your gut feelings, so that you can now refute the joint hypothesis that I am in a state of nihilism and I should be jolly frightened about this, because there's no evidence that you're frightened anymore. So this was just a piece of hypothesis building of a very sophisticated and philosophical sort, the highest level of exploring alternative ways of relating to the world. You now have, I think, a very useful insight into the gift of retaining selfhood that I think we all take it for granted, but it's quite a fragile thing. Luckily, most of us get through the day, if not hopefully most of our lives, by retaining that grip and just continue securing evidence that this is the right hypothesis. I'm a person. I am me. I am functional. This is the way I'm meant to be, and these are the kinds of things I do and the kinds of people I talk to. But that is such a fragile, self-assembled, and had to be maintained hypothesis that that fragility, I think, only is revealed occasionally, and only to some people, when they have the alternative hypothesis that I am not me, or me is not quite as functional as I thought I was, or I'm several me, or me, I am only me, and there is no reality out there.
If you enjoyed that clip, then the full podcast is out right now. You can click around here, as well as subscribe to get notified. Enjoy. Brand new full-length podcasts every Tuesday at 2 p.m. on Theories of Everything.